Hello everyone. So the next chapter after photosynthesis and nutrition is respiration. So this is the second chapter of class 10th. So we will start with the chapter that is respiration. Now what is respiration basically? Respiration hota kya hai? We know that inhalation and exhalation is respiration. हम बोलते हैं ऑक्सीजन इनटेक करना, CO2 रिलीज करना इज रेस्पिरेशन. नो, दिस इज नॉट रेस्पिरेशन, इट इज़ अ पार्ट ऑफ रेस्पिरेशन. बेसिकली ये रेस्पिरेशन नहीं होता है, ये रेस्पिरेशन प्रोसेस का एक पार्ट होता है. ये कंप्लीट रेस्पिरेशन प्रोसेस हम इसे नहीं बोलते, बट जनरली हम इसे मिसअंडरस्टूड कर लेते हैं दैट इनहेलेशन एंड एक्सहेलेशन इज रेस्पिरेशन. नो, इट इज़ नॉट द रेस्पिरेशन. रेस्पिरेशन इज़ बेसिकली अ कैटाबॉलिक प्रोसेस. रेस्पिरेशन जो होता है, अगर हम एक्चुअली रेस्पिरेशन की बात करें तो रेस्पिरेशन होता क्या है, ये एक कैटाबॉलिक प्रोसेस होती है. अब कैटाबॉलिक प्रोसेस क्या होती है, हमें पता है कि हमारे लिविंग ऑर्गेनिजम्स के अंदर बहुत सारी वाइटल एक्टिविटीज़ चलती है. वाइटल और मेटाबॉलिक प्रोसेसेस रन करती है साइमल्टेनियसली. दैट इज़ लाइक फोटोसिंथेसिस इन प्लांट्स, रेस्पिरेशन, डाइजेशन, इंजेशन, एसिमिलेशन. ये सारी प्रोसेसेस वर्क करती हैं और रन करती हैं इन एन ऑर्गेनिज्म और लिविंग ऑर्गेनिज्म. तो ये सारी प्रोसेसेस जो होती हैं इन्हें हम मेटाबॉलिक एक्टिविटीज़ कहते हैं. तो कुछ प्रोसेसेस तो ऐसी होती हैं जिसमें बेसिकली होता क्या है, इन दैट प्रोसेस simpler organic compounds or simpler units they add or they fuse to form complex compound. उसमें simpler compounds होते हैं. The processes, the metabolic processes in which simpler units combine to form complex unit, then that process is known as anabolic process. Ana means to add. Anabolic process is the addition of simpler substances to form complex substances. मतलब उसमें simpler forms कंबाइन होती हैं और कॉम्प्लेक्स फॉर्म बनाती है, तो उसे हम एनाबॉलिक प्रोसेसेस कहते हैं. मैंने बोला, आई एम रिपीटिंग माई सेल्फ, मेटाबॉलिक प्रोसेसेस. एक लिविंग ऑर्गेनिज्म के अंदर बहुत सारी मेटाबॉलिक प्रोसेसेस होती है, जो कि हम उन मेटाबॉलिक प्रोसेसेस को दो कैटेगरीज में डिवाइड करते हैं. वन इज एनाबॉलिक प्रोसेसेस एंड द अदर वन इज कैटाबॉलिक प्रोसेस. एनाबॉलिक प्रोसेसेस दैट इज टू ऐड, जो सिंपलर यूनिट्स ऐड होती हैं और एक कॉम्प्लेक्स यूनिट का फॉर्मेशन करती हैं, उसे हम एनाबॉलिक प्रोसेस कहते हैं. एग्जांपल हम फोटोसिंथेसिस का ले सकते हैं. उसमें क्या होता है, उसमें CO2 एंड H2O दे कंबाइन टू फॉर्म अ कॉम्प्लेक्स मॉलिक्यूल दैट इज ग्लूकोज. सो दिस इज एनाबॉलिक प्रोसेस. नाउ व्हाट इज कैटाबॉलिक प्रोसेस? कैटाबॉलिक प्रोसेस क्या होती है? कैटाबॉलिक प्रोसेस होती है व्हेन दिस कॉम्प्लेक्स कंपाउंड दे डिवाइड or they convert into simpler forms, then the process is known as catabolic process. That is to cut करना. तो जो complex forms होती हैं, जो change होकर simpler और अपनी actual forms में आ जाती हैं, तो वो convert होके where the complex compound broken down into smaller units, then the process is known as catabolic process. So respiration is the process which is a catabolic process. जैसा कि हम समझ गए हैं कैटाबॉलिक प्रोसेस क्या होता है. अब इसमें क्या चीज़ ब्रेक डाउन होगी वही हम इसमें देखेंगे. रेस्पिरेशन जो प्रोसेस होती है, इट्स एन कैटाबॉलिक प्रोसेस. मैंने बोला ये सिर्फ और सिर्फ इनहेलेशन एक्सहेलेशन नहीं होता है. रेस्पिरेशन बेसिकली होता क्या है, ये एक कैटाबॉलिक प्रोसेस होती है जिसमें जो एसिमिलेटेड फूड जो होता है, हमने लास्ट चैप्टर में देखा होगा, आप लोगों ने देखा होगा न्यूट्रिशन चैप्टर में, जब हम डाइजेशन पढ़ते हैं तो उसमें स्टार्च, जो कॉम्प्लेक्स फॉर्म होती है फूड की, दैट इज स्टार्च, प्रोटीन्स और स्टार्च, प्रोटीन. तो दीज आर ब्रोकन डाउन, दे डाइजेस्टेड इनटू और टू फॉर्म न्यूट्रिएंट्स. वो न्यूट्रिएंट्स बनाते हैं जैसे कि अमीनो एसिड. प्रोटीन का ब्रेकडाउन होता है तो अमीनो एसिड का फॉर्मेशन होता है. स्टार्च का ब्रेकडाउन होता है तो हमें ग्लूकोज मिलता है, शुगर मिलती है, सिंगल यूनिट मिलती है. दिस वी नो. स्टार्च का ब्रेकडाउन होता है तो हमें ग्लूकोज मिलता है. एंड व्हेन प्रोटीन इज broken down, then we got the amino acid. So when these assimilated food, which assimilated food I am talking about? I am talking about the assimilated food that is the glucose and the amino acid which is formed after digestion. Digestion के बाद जो form हुए हैं, that is जो starch था वो form हो गया है, वो convert हो गया into glucose, और जो protein था वो convert हो गया into amino acid, that is their simpler unit. Now this simpler unit further divides to form simpler molecules. Now this simpler unit, these single unit further divide to form simple molecules, and this process is known as respiration. इस ही process को हम respiration कहते हैं. That is in which glucose, majorly we know that glucose forms a major part in organisms, or it is present in large amount. So glucose is further converted into CO2, H2O, and where the energy is released in the form of ATP, and this process is known as respiration. इस process को हम respiration कहते हैं. Glucose is the assimilated food. So we start with the definition. Respiration is the process by which assimilated food is oxidized and energy is released. It is an catabolic process, that is, it is an catabolic process where glucose is broken down into CO2 and H2O. Glucose is what? Assimilated food which is oxidized. Now what is the meaning of oxidized? Oxidized means to broken down, to break down. Oxidize का मतलब होता है to break down, where assimilated food is broken down or breaks down into its simpler form, and where the energy is released, and where the energy is released in the form of ATP. Now what is ATP? ATP is adenosine triphosphate. Where assimilated food is broken down into its simpler units and ATP or energy is released, this process, this complete process is known as respiration. इस process को हम respiration कहते हैं. So I told you that breathing is not the respiration completely. Breathing respiration नहीं होता है. Breathing is a part of respiration. Now we will see what is the major difference between respiration and breathing. दोनों के बीच में major difference क्या होता है? So we will start with the differentiation. Respiration is a biochemical process. Now what is biochemical process? Biochemical process, that is, bio means living and chemical means that it is an enzymatic or enzyme catalyzed reaction. Enzyme catalyzed reaction. That is, respiration is a enzyme catalyzed, that is, it occurs or it happens with the help of enzymes. This process takes place with the help of enzymes. Enzymes over here work as a catalyst. So this is an enzyme catalyzed process which takes place in living organisms like humans, mammals, animals. So this is, respiration is basically a biochemical process. It is occurring in living organisms and it's a enzyme catalyzed reaction. So we can say it is a biochemical process. On the other hand, breathing is a physical process, because in breathing what actually we are doing, we are inhalation or we are inhaling the O2, exhalation. What is happening in breathing? We are inhaling oxygen and we are exhaling CO2. So breathing is a physical process. No enzyme is required, no energy is released over here basically. So it's a physical process because it takes place between the individual and the surrounding medium. There's nothing else occurring in this process. So it's a physical process in which inhalation and exhalation process takes place. Second differentiation over here is energy is released in the form of ATP. In respiration, energy is released which is stored in the form of ATP. जो एनर्जी रिलीज होती है वो ATP के फॉर्म में वहाँ स्टोर हो जाती है लिविंग ऑर्गेनिज्म. ऑन द अदर हैंड in breathing there is no energy released over here. Next differentiation of this is enzyme is required in respiration. I told you it's an enzyme catalyzed reaction. So enzyme is required. And what is enzyme? Basically, enzyme is a biocatalyst. Enzyme is a biocatalyst. You have studied about the catalyst in chemistry. So catalyst, what does the catalyst do? They fasten the process of chemical reactions, but they don't change themselves. There is no change occurs in itself. उनमें कोई चेंज नहीं आता, बस वो फास्ट कर देते हैं केमिकल प्रोसेस को. तो enzyme is a biocatalyst. It's a biocatalyst which is extracted from living organisms, so enzyme is required in this process. Enzyme fasten the process because it's a long process and a stepwise process, so enzyme is required in respiration. On the other hand, in breathing, no enzyme, no as such any enzyme is required in this because there is no breakdown taking place. वहाँ पर कोई breakdown ही नहीं हो रहा है, तो वहाँ enzyme की क्यों requirement होगी. Next and the last differentiation is respiration is basically intracellular, that is it is occurring inside the cell. Intra, that is inside. Intra means inside. Intra means inside. Basically, respiration is an intracellular process, that is it is occurring inside the cell. On the other hand, breathing is a extracellular respiration, that is it is not occurring inside our body. It is just the exchange of gaseous or gaseous exchange between the individual and the surrounding. So, breathing is just the physical process in which gaseous exchange takes place, that is we are inhaling oxygen and we are exhaling CO2, that's it. There is no, you can say there is no intracellular concept over here. No, this process is extracellular and the respiration is intracellular. So, this is the major differences between respiration and breathing. I hope this is clear because we generally misunderstand that breathing is the respiration only. No, this is not true. Next, we will take the differentiation between combustion and respiration. Now, what is the difference between respiration and combustion? Combustion, we have seen that it is also takes place in chemistry. Generally, we study the combustion in chemistry, in which again it's a catabolic process in which breakdown of complex substances occurs to form their simpler units. Now, what is the major difference between respiration and combustion? Let's start with the points. First point, again respiration is a biochemical process, I have explained. Combustion, now what is combustion? It's a chemical process. It is a chemical process in which complex form is broken down or is breaking down into its simpler units. Next point is energy is released in respiration. Yes, energy is released in the process of respiration. It is stored in the form of ATP. I have explained over here. And on the other hand, what occurs in combustion? In combustion, we have seen that the energy which is released during the process of combustion is basically the heat energy as well as the light energy. Heat energy and light energy is released during the process of combustion. Next differentiation is enzyme required. Yes, I have explained that enzyme is required in respiration because it's a long process and it's a stepwise process, so it needs to be fastened. So, enzyme is required in this process because the enzyme is basically used to fasten the process and also to break down the complex molecule. On the other hand, in combustion, there is no requirement or there is no as such any requirement of enzyme because we are not, basically it's a fast process. Now, why enzyme is not required? Because it's a fast process. It is linked with the next point, that is it's a fast process. So, there is no such any need for any enzyme over here. On the other hand, respiration is a slow and stepwise process. We will see its different stages in a little later. Next and the last differentiation point is it occurs at normal temperature. Respiration takes place at normal temperature. I am standing over here and the respiration, I am doing my respiration. So, it takes place in normal temperature. So, on the other hand, if we talk about combustion, high amount or high temperature is required for combustion. Respiration तो normal conditions में भी हो सकता है और होता ही है. रेस्पिरेशन नॉर्मल कंडीशंस में भी होता है, नॉर्मल टेम्परेचर पे भी होता है. हाई टेम्परेचर लो टेम्परेचर को कोई इशू नहीं होता है, जबकि कंबशन हाई टेम्परेचर पर ही होता है. So these are the major differences which is generally asked between respiration and combustion. So that's it, and after this we will see the types of respiration in this segment. Let's start with the types of respiration. So the next subheading in this is types of respiration on the basis of location, that is where does the respiration is taking place. So there are three types of respiration based on location is cellular, extracellular, external, sorry, not extracellular, external respiration, and the third one is internal respiration. So first one is cellular respiration. Now what is cellular respiration? In which glucose is broken down to form CO2 plus H2O plus energy is released. So what is cellular respiration? That is the respiration which is taking place inside the cell. ठीक है? So cellular respiration क्या होता है? It is the respiration which takes place inside the cell. So basically we have inhaled oxygen. Now that oxygen will go through the lungs, will go through the windpipe, then it enters the lungs through the bronchi, and then it reaches the alveoli. Now from that alveoli it travels, or the simple diffusion takes place over there, and the CO2 and O2 is exchanged, and then the O2 enters or it releases into the blood, and from that blood it carries to the cells. Now from that cell, I am talking about the cell, that oxygen has reached to the up to the cell. ऑक्सीजन सेल तक पहुंच गई है. अब सेल में क्या होता है? सेल के अंदर के इवेंट पढ़ रहे हैं हम. सेल के अंदर क्या होगा? इन विच glucose is oxidized or broken down into CO2, H2O and ATP is released. So this event, basically this is the last event. Now this form does not further broken down. This is the simplest form. So this is the last step. Then this step occurring inside the cell. This step is occurring inside the cell, and since it is occurring inside the cell, that's why we call this type of respiration as cellular respiration. We call this type of respiration. This is the last step since O2 has traveled. This oxidation, this breaking down of glucose is taking place with the help of oxidation, because we have inhaled oxygen. हमने ऑक्सीजन इनहेल किया है, इसी वजह से तो ग्लूकोज जो है ब्रेक डाउन हुआ है इनटू CO2, H2O एंड ATP. सो ग्लूकोज इज broken down into CO2, H2O and ATP with the help of oxygen, and since it is occurring inside the cell, that's why we call it as cellular respiration. So this is the first one. Second one, external respiration. Now what is external respiration? I have told you that I have inhaled, I am inhaling oxygen with the help of nostrils. So this gaseous exchange, as well as on the other hand or simultaneously I am exhaling CO2 from the same nostril. So this gaseous exchange, that is inhaled oxygen and exhaling CO2, this gaseous exchange is taking place between me and the surrounding. This gaseous exchange is occurring or is taking place between me, between the individual and the surrounding through the nostrils. This type of respiration is known as external respiration, because it is taking place between the individual and between the nostrils of individual and its external environment. So this process is known as external respiration, that is the gaseous exchange between the nostrils of an individual and its surrounding, or we can say between the organism. Next and the last one, since this type of respiration is occurring externally, this is basically the gaseous exchange, and this gaseous exchange takes place or it is occurring externally, that is not inside our cell. It is taking place in between the individual and the external environment. That's why we call it as external respiration. Now what is internal respiration? It is the gaseous exchange between the alveoli and the bloodstream. We have seen that we know this alveoli. Alveoli is surrounded by the blood vessels. So, oxygen is coming through windpipe. Then it enters into the lungs. And in that lungs there are numerous alveoli. So, if we maximize this, if we see its enlarged portion, then what happens? O2 has been inhaled. Now this O2 travels with the through windpipe. Now it enters the bronchioles, and then it finally reaches up to the alveoli. Now from that alveoli, this O2 enters the bloodstream, because bloodstream remains surrounded, or it surrounds the alveoli. We can say, or generally, or it happens that O2 alveoli remains surrounded by bloodstream. So this O2 alveoli, which is filled with O2, now this O2 enters into the bloodstream, and from here CO2 is entered into the alveoli. This type of exchange, this type of gaseous exchange, since it is occurring inside the body, the first one is occurring in between the body, in between the individual and the environment. Now this gaseous exchange is taking place inside or in between the alveoli and the bloodstream in the individual. So this type of respiration is known as internal respiration. So these are the respiration which are taking place on the basis of location. That is, first one is cellular, then external, and then last one is internal. So I hope this is clear. Now there is one more classification of respiration on the basis of oxygen and on the basis of presence and absence of oxygen. Now the types of respiration on the basis of presence or absence of oxygen. So first one we will take aerobic respiration. So the next classification of respiration is based on the presence and absence of oxygen. So first one we will study is aerobic respiration. What is aerobic respiration? The respiration occurs in the presence of oxygen. The respiration which takes place in the presence of oxygen is known as aerobic respiration. Aero, that is air, which takes place or which occurs in the presence of oxygen is known as aerobic respiration. Now what basically happens over here? I told you that in respiration assimilated food is broken down or it is oxidized to form its simpler units or simpler forms. Now what is which one is the assimilated food? That is the glucose. Here glucose is broken down to form two molecules of pyruvate, that is two molecules of pyruvic acid. We know that glucose is 6 carbon compound and this pyruvic acid is basically 3 carbon compound. So this glucose is first of all converted into pyruvate, that is pyruvic acid, and this process is known as glycolysis. What is the meaning of lysis? Lysis means to broken down, to break down. Lysis means to break down. In this process glucose is broken down. यहाँ पर glucose का breakdown हुआ है. So this process is known as glycolysis. Glucose is broken down to form pyruvate or two molecules of pyruvate, and this process is known as glycolysis. Now what is the location? Where does this process takes place? This process takes place inside the cytoplasm, that is inside the cell. So glucose first of all broken down into pyruvate. Now this pyruvate is further broken down into CO2 plus H2O plus ATP. Okay. Glucose is 6 carbon compound, pyruvate is 3 carbon compound, so there will be 2 pyruvic acid or 2 pyruvate molecules. Now here will be 6 carbon compound because we have to balance the equation, and 6 hydrogen or 6 H2O molecule, and 38 ATP is released, or 36 ATP. We can say 38 or 36 ATP is released. This variation we will study a little later. So why does this variation is occurring? So we will see this at the end. So what is in this process, glucose is first broken down into pyruvate, that is pyruvic acid, and this process is known as glycolysis because here lysis means broken down or breaking down, where glucose is breaking down into pyruvic acid. So this process is known as glycolysis and it takes place inside the cytoplasm of a cell. Now this pyruvic acid is further broken down to form its simpler unit. So basically this glucose is converted into CO2, H2O and ATP is released. मतलब ये अपनी simpler forms में अब आ चुका है. फोटोसिंथेसिस में ग्लूकोज कैसे फॉर्मेशन हुआ था? CO2 plus H2 gives you C6H12O6. इसी तरीके से ही तो फॉर्म हुआ था. अगर हम रिवर्स ऑर्डर में चलें तो ऐसे ही फॉर्म हुआ था. वापस ग्लूकोज अपने सिंपलर फॉर्म्स में आ चुका है. नाउ दिस पायरुविक एसिड, basically this step occurs in or we call this step as Krebs cycle. This pyruvic acid enters into the Krebs cycle and then it is converted into CO2 and H2O. But the thing which we have to remember over here is this pyruvic acid first undergo into the link reaction in which acetyl coenzyme A is formed, and then this acetyl coenzyme A is further converted into CO2 and H2O. That is, first pyruvic acid is formed by the glycolysis of glucose, and this pyruvic acid is formed acetyl coenzyme A, and this reaction is known as link reaction. Now this pyruvic acid first undergoes link reaction in order to form acetyl coenzyme A. Now this acetyl coenzyme A later forms CO2 and H2O by entering into the Krebs cycle. This pyruvic acid first formed the acetyl coenzyme A. Now this acetyl coenzyme A then formed the CO2 and H2O. This intermediate step is known as a link reaction because it is a link between the pyruvic acid and the end products, and its end products के बीच में और pyruvic acid के बीच में ये एक link form कर रहा है. That's why we call it as a link reaction. And this reaction, this acetyl coenzyme A later enters into the Krebs cycle. Now this Krebs cycle and then forms as a result of Krebs cycle, we got the end products as CO2 and H2O. Why we are calling it as Krebs cycle? Because this conversion was given by scientist Krebs. So this step is known as Krebs cycle. First of all, I am repeating myself. Glucose is converted into pyruvate, which is a 3 carbon compound. So 2 molecules of pyruvic acid is released or is formed. Now this pyruvic acid undergoes the link reaction in order to form the acetyl coenzyme A. Now this acetyl coenzyme A then enters the Krebs cycle and then it forms the end products, that is the CO2 and H2O, and 38 or 36 molecule of ATP is released. So this is the process basically which takes place in aerobic respiration. Now on the other hand, now second type of respiration, that is anaerobic respiration. Now what is anaerobic respiration? A means without, anaerobic without air, that is without oxygen. The respiration which takes place without, respiration which takes place without oxygen. is known as anaerobic respiration. We have seen aerobic respiration. Now what is anaerobic respiration? The respiration which takes place without oxygen or in the absence of oxygen. We can say in the absence of oxygen is known as anaerobic respiration. That is, respiration which takes place without oxygen or in absence of oxygen is known as anaerobic respiration. That is, oxygen over here works as a cutter, as a chopper. That is, it helps in breaking down the glucose molecule. ओके, पायरुवेट मॉलिक्यूल एज वेल एज द ग्लूकोज मॉलिक्यूल. यहाँ पर ऑक्सीजन एक चॉपर का काम करता है, वो कॉम्प्लेक्स मॉलिक्यूल को सिंपलर और सोल्यूबल फॉर्म में, एब्जॉर्बल फॉर्म में उन्हें कट करता है, उन्हें फॉर्म करता है. यहाँ पर ऑक्सीजन ही नहीं है, देयर इज नो ऑक्सीजन बिकॉज दिस रेस्पिरेशन इज टेकिंग प्लेस इन द एब्सेंस ऑफ ऑक्सीजन. सो there won't be complete oxidation. Complete oxidation won't occur. That is, complete breakdown does not take place in this process. And because complete oxidation is not taking place in this process and complete breakdown does not take place, so here the amount of energy which is released is very very less as compared to the aerobic respiration. यहाँ पर जो एनर्जी रिलीज होगी वो बहुत कम होगी एज कम्पेयर टू एरोबिक रेस्पिरेशन, क्योंकि यहाँ पर ऑक्सीजन का इन्वॉल्वमेंट नहीं है. यहाँ पर ऑक्सीजन का इन्वॉल्वमेंट था और इसीलिए जो ऑक्सीजन थी वो चॉपर का काम कर रही थी और वो एनर्जी जो थी और कंप्लीट ऑक्सीडेशन कॉज करती थी और कंप्लीट ऑक्सीडेशन की वजह से हमें हाई अमाउंट ऑफ एनर्जी मिलती थी. और यहाँ पर ऐसा नहीं है. यहाँ पर this process is taking place in the absence of oxygen, and since there is no oxygen, so there won't be or complete breakdown won't occur. And because complete breakdown won't occur, there at the end the energy which is released is very less in amount. So let's see. One more thing over here is this first step, this step, that is glucose is converted into pyruvate. Let's see this over here. That is, I am explaining anaerobic respiration. That is, glucose first converted into pyruvate. Pyruvate, 2 molecule, this is 6 carbon and this is 3 carbon. So glucose is converted into pyruvate. This is the first step in both. This also you have to remember, this is the common step which takes place in both aerobic as well as in aerobic respiration. This step takes place in both type of respiration. That is, in aerobic as well as in anaerobic respiration. Now from here diversion occur. That is, this pyruvic acid then broken down into, in some cases, that is, I am talking about yeast. In case of yeast, that is, in yeast anaerobic respiration takes place. That is, the respiration in absence of oxygen. Now what are the end products that we got in this type of respiration? This we have to see. Here we got ethanol plus CO2 plus 2 ATP. Ethanol is 2 carbon compound, so 2 molecules of ethanol, 2 molecules of CO2 and 2 molecules of ATP we will get at the end or as an end products. Now this pyruvic acid, that is in living organism during vigorous exercise. Now this anaerobic respiration also takes place in our muscles. So the next case we will take over here is in muscles during vigorous exercise. During vigorous exercise, this pyruvate or this pyruvic acid is converted into lactic acid, which is a 3 carbon compound, and 2 molecules of lactic acid will be formed. And because the carbon is balanced over here, so there will be no CO2, there is only 2 molecule of ATP is released. So this is the respiration. This is known as glycolysis. We have seen this, which takes place inside the cytoplasm. And the later stages, that is the conversion. Conversion takes place over here. The first step remains the same in aerobic as well as in anaerobic respiration, but the diversion which takes place is in the second step. That is, two molecules of pyruvic acid is then converted. There will be two cases. In first case, we will see, or we will take the example of yeast, in which anaerobic respiration takes place, that is the respiration in absence of oxygen, in which the end products that we got will be ethanol, 2 molecule of ethanol, because ethanol is 2 carbon compound, and 2 molecule of CO2 as well as 2 molecule of ATP, because there won't be any, or there won't be complete oxidation of food or glucose or pyruvic acid. वहाँ पर pyruvic acid का complete oxidation नहीं होगा, इसलिए only there will be 2 molecule of ATP. वहाँ पर high amount of energy release नहीं होगी. Next, if we take the case of muscle, second type of anaerobic respiration that take place is in the muscles, but only and only during vigorous exercise. जब हम vigorous exercise करते हैं तभी lactic acid का formation होता है from pyruvic acid. During vigorous exercise, suppose I am standing over here, no, lactic acid won't form in my body. But when I started running, when I started doing some physical work or some vigorous exercise, then this lactic acid will form, then the anaerobic respiration takes place and the lactic acid formation will occur. And since lactic acid is 3 carbon compound, it is a 3 carbon compound, so there will be 2 molecule of lactic acid and there won't be any CO2 and only 2 molecule of ATP will be released. So that process, that is the formation of ethanol where CO2 is released as well as 2 molecule of ATP is released in yeast, is known as fermentation. This process is basically known as fermentation, and its major application is in brewer industries or in beverages. You can say in beverages, that is, production of beverages occurs with the help of this process, this oxidation, this catabolic process, that is anaerobic respiration takes place in yeast. With the help of yeast, they produce the beverages or the drinks, because in that they use the yeast in order to form the ethanol. Ethanol is formed by or with the help of yeast, and this process is known as fermentation because it takes place in the absence of oxygen, and as a result of it, ethanol is formed. So this application of this step is, or this process is, brewer industries, beverages, etc. On the other hand, if lactic acid is accumulate inside our muscles में अगर lactic acid accumulate हो जाता है, then cramps आ जाते हैं, हमें पेन होने लग जाता है in muscles, etc. etc. So it may create problem or it will be problematic. So these are the two types of respiration on the basis of absence and presence of oxygen. Now we will see what are the major differences between these two, because it is generally asked, or that is, write down the major differences between or distinguish anaerobic respiration from aerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration, first point, takes place in presence of oxygen. On the other hand, anaerobic respiration in absence of oxygen. Here, end products will be always end products will be CO2 and H2O. Here the end products will be ethanol and lactic acid. Always. In this case, CO2 and H2O will form always, but in this condition, ethanol and lactic acid will form, or it will be the first one to be formed along with some amount of CO2. That does not mean and the third point between aerobic and anaerobic respiration is that high amount of energy is released. Here less amount of energy is released. Complete oxidation or complete breakdown of organic compounds. Basically these 2 points are interlinked. High amount of energy is released because there is the complete oxidation of organic compound, and in anaerobic respiration less amount of energy is released because there is partial oxidation or incomplete oxidation, we can say incomplete breakdown of organic compounds takes place. Next, in presence of oxygen, we have seen in absence of oxygen, end product CO2, H2O, ethanol and lactic acid, high amount of energy is released, less amount of energy is released, complete oxidation of organic compound occurs in aerobic respiration, and in anaerobic respiration incomplete breakdown of organic compound occurs. It is not toxic to the organism, but in anaerobic respiration it is toxic for the organism. Why is it toxic? Because if this lactic acid it accumulates inside the muscles, it may cause problem to the individual. It may cause cramps, pain, arthritis, etc. So it may cause problem to the individual. So this can be considered as toxic for the organism or for the individual, but this aerobic respiration is not toxic for the individual. So this is the basic difference between aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Now we will see respiration. How does the respiration takes place in plants? What is the mode of respiration in plants? Basically in plants the respiration takes place through roots, stems and leaves individually. Respiration in plants occurs through simple diffusion, and it occurs through roots, stem and leaves individually. You must have studied about diffusion in the chapter, that is cell chapter. What is diffusion? That is the movement of molecules from its high concentration to its low concentration till the equilibrium is reached. So respiration in plants, how does the respiration occurs in plants? The respiration in plants takes place through roots, stem and leaves individually. Respiration occurs through leaves also, respiration occurs through stem also, and respiration occurs through roots also. The respiration takes place through all these parts individually. Now what is the process? What will be the mode of respiration over here? We have organ, we have respiratory tract, we have respiratory organ, respiratory path is over there. So they don't have such types of organs in them. So what are the, we can say, what is the path followed for respiration by plants? The process by which respiration occurs in plants is the simple diffusion process. Oxygen is higher in external environment, so diffusion occurs and the movement of oxygen molecule takes place inside the plant. Now what are the gates? What are the entrance gates in plants through which this oxygen enters into the plant? In case of root, we know that is plants have, these are the roots, they have root hairs, this is the root, they have root hairs. Now which is embedded or which remains underground. Now this is the soil particles which have air in between them. Soil are like this, soil particles have air in between them. This air contains O2 in it. Now this O2, this root remains in direct contact. This root as well as its root hair remains in direct contact with the air present in between the soil particle. Now from this air, the oxygen enters into the root hair. Suppose this is the root hair. Here is air. It contains O2 in it. Now this O2 enters this root hair, and from this root hair, O2 enters into the root and then it goes upright through the pipelines, and that is, we know that along with different channels, it moves upward and from there it goes or it is distributed into the complete plant. So basically the process which takes place over here is simple diffusion. Oxygen is more in amount in between the soil particle. So it is moved inside the root hair. It enters the root hair because it has to maintain the balance. Now this O2 enters the root hair and from that root hair it travels up to the different parts. So this way respiration occurs through roots. Now in case of stem, in hard and woody stems, their outermost coating becomes hard because that secondary or that hard coating is basically what? It is the secondary cortex. If we goes in its detail, that is the secondary cortex, that you must don't know this. Basically it has the hard and woody stem. This hard part, it has some cracks in between them because it is the most, you can say, the old, the aged part. जो hard और woody stem होता है वो old हो जाता है, aged हो जाता है, and because of that cracks वहाँ पर आने लग जाते हैं. We are able to see the cracks in that hard and woody stem, and since we see, and that cracks is basically what? We call them as lenticels. We call them as lenticels. This is the matured and the, you can say, matured part or the aged part, or we can say the old part, and because of this there are some cracks which appears on the woody and the hard stem, which is known as lenticels. And from this opening or from this cracks, the gaseous exchange takes place through stem. So in this way the stem helps in respiration. And in case of leaves, we know that leaves have stomata in them which helps in the gaseous exchange. This you must have seen in the chapter, that is in the last chapter called photosynthesis. Gaseous exchange, the major gaseous exchange takes place through stomata which is found in leaves. So it plays a major role in respiration, that is the leaves plays the major role in gaseous exchange, that is in respiration, because it has stomata which opens and closes time to time and thus helps in respiration or the gaseous exchange. In this way respiration occurs in plants. Now we will see how does the respiration takes place in different organisms. Respiration in animals. How does the respiration takes place in different animals? Let's start with the smallest and the unicellular organism. That is unicellular organism, I am talking about amoeba or paramecium. Since it is a unicellular organism, there is no organ, tissues, cells, there is no such criteria or no such concept. So basically their general body surface we participate in the gaseous exchange. जो general body surface होगी, जो complete body surface होगी, वहीं से ही respiration होगा, वहीं से ही complete respiration होगा. So general body surface respiration takes place in unicellular organism, that is amoeba or paramecium. Next, there is one more method of respiration found in insects, that is tracheal system. Grasshoppers, let's take the example of grasshopper. Insects have some tiny pores in their body. Over their body, some tiny spores is found or are found, which is known as spiracles. That tiny holes, that tiny pores are known as spiracles, which enters or which opens into, there were tiny pores which opens into a small tube called trachea. That trachea, suppose this is the pore, this opens into the small tube which is known as trachea. This trachea later joins a large tube which is known as tracheal tube, which is known as tracheal tube, and in this way the oxygen is entered inside the body of insects. So this type of system or this system is known as tracheal system, which is found in insects, which consist of small pores and small tubes called tracheal tubes, and this system is known as tracheal system, which is found in insects, and in this way respiration occurs or the gaseous exchange takes place in insects, or if you see in grasshopper. So this type of respiration occurs in insects. There is one more respiration which takes place through gills. In aquatic conditions, the respiration takes place, or fishes respire with the help of their gills. This we know since childhood, and that type of respiration is known as branchial respiration because it occurs with the help of gills. Now there is one more type of respiration which takes place through the moist skin, which is found in frog and amphibians and frog and earthworm, because they have moist skin, and because of moist skin they have abundant blood supply. That moist skin is vascular, and because of these characteristics are necessary for respiration. So these characteristics provides the path for respiration or for gaseous exchange. So in case of we can say frog and earthworm, their skin, their moist skin helps in respiration, and that type of respiration is known as cutaneous respiration. There is one more type of respiration, pulmonary respiration, which is found in those organisms with lungs. Those organisms have lungs, they shows pulmonary type of respiration, that is the respiration through lungs, that is reptiles, birds and some amphibians. So this type of respiration is basically found in these organisms, that is respiration through lungs. There is one more type of respiration, that is buccal respiration, that takes place through buccal cavity. We know that we have mouth, which is a slit like opening which opens into a chamber called buccal cavity or buccal chamber. Now the respiration which takes place through this buccal cavity is known as buccal respiration, which is found in frog. Basically, I have mentioned the frog in 3 types of respiration. Frog shows different types of respiration. That is, in larval stage, it helps or it uses its gills in order to respire, and in adult form, since it's an amphibian, it lives in water, and when it remains in water, it uses its moist skin for respiration. Now when it comes over the land, it uses its lungs to respire as well as its buccal chamber or buccal cavity to respire. So frog shows different modes of respiration. So we have seen different types of respiration in different animals. So this much is about this lecture. We will continue this in the next lecture. Thank you.